Linguistic Justice Collaborative is a grassroots organization that is committed to its mission to identify, design, and sustain the culturally and linguistically diverse languages and literacy practices throughout the state of Georgia. We are able to work towards this mission through a shared theoretical framework, design for inquiry and research that we conduct, and ultimately a theory of change that guides our decision making. Focusing on our theory of change, we recognize that within inquiry design, we're able to design projects to help us identify different languages and literacy practices that are currently being used, and even develop resources that help sustain them. But ultimately, we're talking about ideological change. We're asking people to change their minds and change their behaviors related to language and linguistic justice. And that is not an easy thing to do. Changing behaviors and changing our minds is a difficult task. So we developed a theory of change. How do we believe people change? This was based on analyzing our work throughout the past 2.5 to 3 years and analyzing what were the moments or instances where people were most likely to change their minds or change their practice as a result of interacting with LJC members, our projects, our materials, and resources. First and foremost, our theory of change is humanizing. This is a recognition that each person has a unique history and experiences that construct their linguistic ideologies, and each person is worthy of dialogue. So how does this translate to action? In the moment, day to day, each member of the LJC is empowered to make decisions on behalf of the LJC. So here are some of the decisions we make under the lens of humanizing. We do not turn down any individual who wants to engage in conversation, a project, or some sort of collaboration. But we also understand not every conversation can be had by every person. Instead, we engage in dialogue in authentic settings whenever possible. Sometimes we're hosting a tent at a festival, or doing community education in public parks, or inviting people to have a shared meal. We ensure that those who are present come from different positionalities within those spaces to be able to navigate the range of engagements that might occur. Second, our theory of change is that change occurs in civil, intimate, and vulnerable relationships. We try to ensure that every event has opportunities for conversations with the smallest audience possible. So, for example, community education events are going to involve a lot of collaborators from the LJC. We're going to break it down into multiple exhibits, stations, and spaces to work. And that way we can have these one-on-one conversations. At most conferences, we try to organize them as poster sessions or roundtable sessions or structured roundtables in order to make sure we have these smaller conversations. And while we accept and seek to accept invitations and opportunities to be in dialogue, when there are conflicts and we don't have the material resources or manpower to be able to be present at all opportunities, we always prioritize the local over the national. And the more local to us and the communities we're a part of, the better. Third, we believe sustained change is more likely when those humanizing and intimate experiences are rooted in empathy. Now, empathy can't be created or demanded or coerced, but there are opportunities for it to be modeled. So we engage in storytelling or learning how to tell stories about changes in our own linguistic ideologies or language practices, and that elicits opportunities for perspective taking. These stories provide insights into the processes of how others change, which can spark change in others as well. So, for example, during a project where we were building a deaf studies curriculum, the hearing members of our team learned about deaf culture, deaf identity, and the experience of deafhood through storytelling from our deaf community partners. Being in authentic spaces led to opportunities for perspective taking in real time, like trying to understand how a sign in the bathroom that talks about hearing flushing to know whether or not the toilet has actually flushed, how that might be understood or be read differently across our experiences. So storytelling then adds those personal cultural, social, or historical contexts uh, to how certain language ideologies show up in everyday life. And we can draw from these stories and at times other published stories, if we don't have access to them ourselves, to grow in empathetic understanding. Fourth, we believe change happens through dialogue. Dialogue is necessary to build truly humanizing, intimate, and empathetic conversation. And this element of our theory of change prioritizes asking questions and collaboratively exploring new information, those new perspectives, the research and experiences. So this means doing things like designing resources that prompt thinking, or whether it be in a collective setting or independently. We also, when new information is introduced, we accept it as an opportunity for further community collaboration if there's resistance to it. So, for example, we had a community member come to a community event and challenge us, wondering why it was focused purely on a Black language from an American perspective, and it didn't consider the world languages of Black language speakers. So that community member then was invited into collaboration and ended up leading a world language study on language justice the very next summer. Finally, with our last piece of our theory of change, we know that true change means that dialogue can't stay internalized. It has to move to intentional action. So while folks are engaged in dialogue, we always try to set a purpose. Maybe we're asking them to add a personal experience or history to the timeline of language, race, and laws in their local community. And that same resource can then be translated into a timeline that teachers can use and have their students add to it. So we create a living history of language, race, and place within a local community. Or maybe we're at these community events providing resources so others can notice linguistic ideologies in action, or language diversity while listening to others. So it can intentionally change the way we listen before we ask others to change the way they speak. And as one of our community members reminds us consistently, sometimes the action is also doing nothing. For those of us that are engaged in this work, sometimes the action step is to rest. So knowing that the theory of change now developed, it can be taken up by collaborators within the LJC. So each of us is empowered to make those on the ground, in the moment decisions daily without needing to immediately discuss it with others. Because we know ultimately, we believe that to change others and work toward our mission involves humanizing, intimate, empathetic dialogue that leads to action. So here's your action step. If you haven't already, follow the Linguistic Justice Collaborative on social media, subscribe to our YouTube, shoot us an email, or come back to our website to keep learning.